Imagine this. It's 1998 in Beijing. The Chinese economy is shaky in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. The press room is full, the atmosphere tense. Premier Zhu Rongji steps up to the podium, ready to face a room of domestic and international journalists. He doesn't hold back. He lays out a clear plan to inject public funds into China's state-owned banks, details the government's strategy to fix non-performing loans, and even jokes, famously, about preparing 100 coffins for corrupt officials, including one for himself. It's a moment of clarity, confidence, and leadership. The message was unmistakable. China is facing its problems head on, and the world is invited to see how. Now, fast forward to 2025. The Chinese economy is once again under stress, this time from the collapse of its massive real estate bubble, ballooning bad loans, and sluggish domestic consumption. But instead of facing the world with answers, China's leadership is silent. No press conference, no bold vision. Just a quiet, behind the scenes decision to inject 500 billion yuan, about $69 billion, into its state owned banks. The scale of the action is massive, but the silence, deafening. This move comes at a critical moment. China's economy, once roaring, is now stumbling. The property sector, which accounted for nearly 30% of GDP, has collapsed. Local governments are in deep debt. Consumers are holding back, and non performing loans across the banking system are growing. The decision to inject public funds signals just how serious the situation has become. It's a throwback to 1998, but with a very different tone. Back then, China showed the world a roadmap. Today, it's showing uncertainty, and that's the heart of the issue. It's not just about money, it's about trust. In 1998, Zhu Rongji was seen as an economic czar. He had both the power and the credibility to make hard decisions and communicate them. Today, Premier Qiang doesn't hold the same sway. He's ranked second in the Communist Party hierarchy, but real authority lies with President Xi Jinping. Xi has centralized power to an extent not seen in decades. That means Li isn't steering the ship, he's following orders. This lack of independent economic leadership is unsettling. Investors, analysts, and even domestic stakeholders are unsure who's really in charge of fixing the economy and whether they're willing to level with the public about the scale of the crisis. The cancellation of the Premier's annual press conference, once a staple of the National People's Congress, says a lot. In a time of economic uncertainty, that kind of transparency isn't just symbolic, it's critical. Markets thrive on confidence, and confidence comes from clear communication. Without it, speculation fills the void. Is this 500 billion yuan just the beginning? Is the government preparing for a wider financial crisis? What's the long term plan to fix the property market or support local governments? We don't know. And that's the problem. The comparisons to post bubble Japan are growing louder. Japan, after its asset bubble burst in the 1990s, entered what's now known as the lost decades, years of economic stagnation, deflation, and weak consumer confidence. China appears to be teetering on the edge of a similar fate. The warning signs are there: a real estate driven economy imploding, zombie companies surviving only on credit, and stimulus measures that lack structural reform behind them. But Japan also had institutions that functioned with transparency and leadership that, at least to a degree, engaged with public discourse. China's current approach is much more opaque, and that's what's amplifying the anxiety. Let's be clear. This isn't just a Chinese problem. The global economy is deeply intertwined with China's. Its slowdown affects global trade, supply chains, commodity markets, and investor sentiment. When the world's second largest economy is in trouble and staying silent about it, that silence echoes through the entire financial system. What's more, without open dialogue and a willingness to take painful but necessary reform steps, China risks locking itself into a cycle of stagnation. The tools of the past, real estate driven growth, massive infrastructure spending, and easy credit, no longer have the same effect. What's needed now is a new direction, but it has to come with clarity and leadership. So, where does this leave us? China is taking big steps on paper, raising the fiscal deficit, injecting capital into banks, and trying to stabilize the property sector. But without transparency, without clear communication, and without a leader willing to take ownership of the economic narrative, those steps don't inspire confidence. In fact, they raise more questions than they answer. If China wants to avoid Japan's fate, it doesn't just need policy, it needs presence. Someone who, like Zhu Rongji, can look the public and the world in the eye and say, this is the problem, this is what we're doing, and this is how we'll get through it. Until then, silence may be the loudest signal of all.